Welcome to the Chief Endurance Officer Podcast. I'm your host, Greg McDonough. Each week, we hear real-time stories from athletes and CEOs on how to maximize performance through an endurance mindset. Let's get started. Welcome to the Chief Endurance Officer Podcast. I'm your host, Greg McDonough. Today's guest is a high-skilled, talented leader with over 24 years of experience. He's the podcast host for all things endurance, the founder and director of the United Endurance Sport Coaching Academy. Please welcome Rick Prince. Rick, welcome to the show.
Yeah, thanks for having me, Greg. Appreciate it.
It's awesome to have you here. We love talking about endurance and the endurance mindset. And Rick, I'd love to know, how has your endurance mindset impacted your life unexpectedly?
It's a good question. I think the endurance mindset, I started off as a competitive cyclist. In college, I ran track and cross country. And, I thought that was just sort of isolated to endurance. And I found that, the skill set, the almost the physical capacity, but certainly the mental capacity has really translated to starting and owning a business, just sort of the resilience it takes, the ups and downs, and just, for lack of a better word, having the endurance to keep going and going and going and going to kind of see it through to your goal. So yeah, it's sort of an all-encompassing thing on my end.
You're absolutely right. And the connections there are tremendous. Any specific event within starting your business that you realize, wow, if I hadn't been an endurance athlete, or if I hadn't done X because of my endurance training, that you wouldn't have been prepared, or you wouldn't have been able to accomplish the outcome?
Yeah, I think so. There's one specific thing, I think everyone just probably in general, but certainly people that are, starting up their own business and growing it, there's so many times you're just ready to throw in the towel. You're not making a lot of money, or you're having a bad day. And I thought back to this. I always think about this one time, this one bike race I entered. It was like 40 degrees. It was raining. It was the most miserable I've ever been on the bike, and people were quitting all over the place. And I kept going till a certain point, and then I quit. I knew my team car was behind me. I threw in the towel and quit. And I felt better immediately. I was in a warm car and all this. And then for like, I don't know, a month or two afterwards, I just hated myself. I was so angry at myself for quitting. And that really resonates with me because I know how awful that felt. And I thought, so now when I get in those situations where I just want to, quit and throw in the towel, whether it be on a project or just sometimes the whole company in general, I always think back to that and how awful I felt and how mad at myself I was for it. So that's one experience in particular that I always go back to, that helps me kind of stay in the game.
That's a great example. I'm curious, Rick, how do you talk to your team about this? So that's a very individualized experience. And now you're leading a team, and maybe that team is feeling, hey, we're stuck, we should quit, we should take a different direction. How do you communicate that message to your team?
It's interesting. I have a fairly small team, but I'm very fortunate in the fact that my main business partner, her name's Cindy Abrami. She's sort of the brains behind the operation. It keeps it going. She's incredible. She's actually more competitive than I am. She's I think a 2-time ITU age group triathlon world champion for the duathlon. So she is hardcore. So she is, I think she takes, more of that probably than I do, as far as like not quitting, not giving up, and just seeing everything through, and not just seeing things through, but seeing things through, the right way, detail oriented, good at multitasking. So yeah, we've never had that specific conversation, but I think it's primarily because I haven't had to, because she's just so, like I said, she's probably even more so than I am with that sort of stick to it, see it through, get it done.
And do you think it's because of her competitive background and endurance mindset that you must see eye to eye on many different things? I'd love to know a little bit more about that partnership dynamic and having a similar mindset, and what the pros and cons have been.
Yeah, not a lot of cons, to be honest with you. It's mostly been all sort of on the pro side. I think we're both very detail oriented, which I think you sort of need to be an athlete. You need to check all the boxes, make sure you're ready, make sure you're prepared, and for lack of a better word, you suffer when you're out there competing. It's not always pleasant. Working is not always pleasant. I mean, I would say the far majority of it is kind of grunt work, but just like
Mhm.
training is, you're out there just putting in the miles and all that kind of stuff, just grinding. Um, and we also have similar, outlooks as far as like, what quality means, also patience. Yeah, I think the other thing that endurance athletics teach you is patience. Things don't happen overnight. You're not going to see great results from just one training session. So I think her and I both also from the endurance world appreciate that good things take time. You play the long game. And that's helpful, especially when it comes to like marketing strategies and so on and so forth. I think we're very see eye to eye on sort of the long-term approach and the as it relates to goals for our company.
I'm curious, did both of you go into this business together, or did one start it and the other one join? Give us a little bit of the history of how this got off the ground.
Yeah, I started it. I started as a side gig. I was working in New York City as a personal trainer. And the fitness industry is very similar to the coaching industry from an educational standpoint, in that they're both unregulated industries. So I felt that the bar was pretty low in the fitness industry, and I assumed that it was probably even lower in the coaching industry. So I wanted to create a product that was, sort of high level coaching information. So yeah, I started on my own. I grew it in New York City and eventually moved out here to Colorado, sort of the Front Range, where sort of the mecca of all things endurance is. So it's good for sort of making connections. Cindy came on board later. I got to know her because just via sort of online, took our triathlon coach certification, and just seeing her interactions we have a private Facebook group once you become a coach, and just seeing her interactions and what she said, how she said it, I was super, super impressed with. And I reached out to her, and it just happened that it was good timing that she had done something similar to the role she's doing now with another company. And she was looking to make a switch. So yeah, it all sort of worked out.
That's awesome. Let's go a little deeper on when this idea came for this business and how long you ran it as a side gig. And then what was the pivotal moment that said, all right, this is it. I need to have one focus, one business. Tell us through the story. And then in that, also explain to us what your business does.
Yeah. So the business sort of started as far as an idea way back in 2000, and I think like a lot of people, it always stayed as an idea, never actually pulled the trigger on it. It was just always something I wanted to do. Um, and then in about 2014, I started working on actually a little bit earlier. I guess 2013, I started working on it. Doing the research, writing the content, which I'll discuss in a second. Um, and then it stayed a side gig from about 2014 till about 2018, when I was still living in New York City. The pivotal moment was really the birth of our son, to be honest with you. He was born in 2018 and didn't want to raise him in New York City. I had vacationed out in Colorado growing up. And again, as I mentioned earlier, knowing that Colorado was such a hotbed of everything endurance athletics, the business was growing, but it wasn't quite at the point where I would say I felt comfortable, just sort of, okay, I'm leaving this job. I'm going to go all in on this. But I just had this thought in the back of my head that if I could do that and put in more time and not do the personal training thing, then it would grow. And luckily the bet paid off. Um, Once we moved out here, again, sort of slow growth, but it certainly grew. But that was sort of the pivotal moment, the birth of our son, I would say, just not wanting to be in New York City. Um, the business, United Endurance Sports Coaching Academy, it is a endurance sports education company. Primarily, we focus on educating and certifying coaches, endurance sports coaches. So we have a running, ultra running, cycling, triathlon, and endurance sports nutrition certification class. We have one more certification in the works, which is a strength conditioning certification specifically for endurance athletics. So we have some other things as well, like specialization courses, and we're always sort of growing, but that's the core of our business.
And are you working directly with coaches to get certified, or are you a certifying body for other organization?
Yeah, no, we are the certifying body. We have collaborations with some of the national governing bodies, like USA Cycling, USA Triathlon. But again, as I noted earlier, because it's not a regulated industry where there's a singular organization that certifies or whatnot an individual. There's nothing like that. So there can be multiple players in that space. So we're one of them. So yeah, we are the certifying body and the education body as well.
So I would suspect we've got audience members who are athletes who have considered hiring a coach. Any words of advice on style of coach, certifications, those types of things that an athlete should consider before making that decision?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I get that asked that quite a bit. Yes, I guess that's the the short answer. You know, as someone who runs a certifying company, I think it, it's not so much the certification. I mean, if someone has a certification, that's great. Maybe I should be promoting this a little bit more, seeing as how this is what I do. But it's really the drive to know about how the body works, how to apply that, that they're not just so many coaches, I think, just say, well, this worked for me, therefore it's going to work for my athletes. That sort of N of one principle. And that clearly is not the case. So I think by having, whether it be through a certification or just, doing their own research, having, being educated on what the body is, the sort of the newest research out there on physiology and how it pertains to human performance, I think is important. I think it's also really important. A lot of coaches out there hang their hats on their own performances. If you go to like Google, coaching websites or whatever, you'll see like, oh, I can run a 2:30 marathon, or, I can, run or bike or swim this fast. There is zero correlation to how fast someone can perform themselves and how good of a coach they are. But unfortunately, a lot of people make that sort of correlation, and therefore a lot of coaches sort of market that. Maybe overly market is the right word. I do think it's important that the coach has done the sport, they know about it clearly. But I don't. So I would say the things to avoid would be coaches that overly emphasize how fast they are, and then coaches that utilize their own training. Just basically say, this is what works for me, so it's going to work for you. Or this is what worked for another athlete of mine, this is going to work for you. I think it's important to, you mentioned that, sort of the personality type. Personality type is huge. You could have someone who has a PhD in kinesiology, has coached world champions and Olympic champions, but if you guys don't see eye to eye, both on personality or the training methodologies, it's probably not going to work. So it's important that the coach or that the prospective coach and the athlete sit down or do a Zoom and have a chat. The athlete should interview the coach and come ready with questions that they think that would be pertinent to their potential future coaching relationship.
So you mentioned this idea came to you in around 2000. What developments, both good and bad, have you seen in the coaching industry?
Yeah. So, I mean, it's developed a lot. It's developed a lot. I would say, the good and the bad are kind of the same thing. Oddly, I think one of the most awesome things out there is all these metrics, a lot of the wearables, cycling power meter, heart rate, where it's going now, sweat meters, core body temperatures. There's all sorts of data out there that coaches can be a little bit more quantitative, a little less, just kind of throwing darts at a wall when it comes to analyzing performance, programming, recovery, so on and so forth. So that's one of the biggest changes I've seen over the years is training technology, I guess, if we want to sort of dump it in a bucket. The downside is it's almost like there's too much as well. And oftentimes the value of data isn't in these singular data points like heart rate or power, but it's in the correlation of the data. An example of this would be heart rate and percent body fat. If you look at just body weight in isolation, you don't know if you're putting on fat or muscle. I mean, you could certainly guesstimate that based on how you look in the mirror, I suppose, but it's not this hard number. Whereas when you add percent body fat to the mix, you can say, oh, okay, I've gained 3 pounds, but I've lost muscle, or I've lost fat and gained muscle. So those, again, correlating those two data points provides much more value than one in isolation. So I think the challenge, and it feels like every day a new training technology comes out there that assesses something new. I think the challenge for coaches is going to be to really understand what this data is. Is it really important? Is it important to my athletes or to myself? And then how can I correlate that with some other training data to give me meaningful information? So I would say, I mean, there are a lot of things, but I would say over the years, that's probably the biggest plus and minus, if that is sort of the best way to put it from my end.
No, that's really insightful. And thinking about it bigger picture, Rick, many of us have many different coaches, right? We've got a strength and conditioning coach, you got a triathlon coach, you've got a swim coach, you got a mental coach, you got your chiropractor, et cetera, et cetera. Who gets to play head coach, right? Because it's very much isolation, one-on-one relationships, but really collectively, that information needs to be shared and analyzed and decisions made from it. Take it from another perspective. Like my daughter, who does crew and swimming and plays golf and some other sports, those coaches don't talk to each other. So they don't know that she just had a balls to the wall workout yesterday, and now the swim coach is picking on her for being slow in the pool.
Yeah.
Who gets to play, or who should play, that head coach role where it's sort of managing all the information?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I would say first and foremost, as that saying goes, it takes a village, especially nowadays, and I think you see that it takes a village approach as you get higher as you get closer to the elite level. I think at the lowest levels, or not the lowest levels, but sort of call it the regular levels, oftentimes whatever the primary sport is, let's say it's, running, for example, the primary running coach will sort of play some of those roles. It's also important, I think, that we discuss scope of practice, because what you do find is athletes will say, hey, look, I have the money to hire you, Greg, as my running coach, but I don't have the money for a psychologist or a nutritionist or a biomechanist or whatever. And then it gets into a really slippery slope, because then sometimes the coach feels the need to give this information, and either it's outside their scope of knowledge or outside their scope of practice, which then it's just straight up illegal. You can't do that. So that's one thing I think to note. I think to answer your question, what I found at least is that the primary sport coach is sort of the ringleader, and then they work with these other specialists, to your point, psychologists, nutritionists, strength coach, so on and so forth. It should be done a lot more than it is, as far as having that holistic approach and bringing in all these different professionals and having them communicate. That you noted that is the most important thing. Again, because if I'm having my athlete do some crazy workout and then, they're tired the next day and they have a meeting with their sports psychologist, and they're like, just can barely keep their eyes open, everyone needs to be on the same team. So the communication part is absolutely critical, whether it's different sports like your daughter does, or within the same sport, and then these sort of ancillary specialists all talking together, kind of like what you would see in the medical field, right? Like you would have an oncologist speak to, the GP speaks to the hematologist. It's same approach.
That's extremely helpful. And as a parent, thank you. Well, speaking of, as a parent, what would be some red flags that your primary sport coach, or just a sport coach, is basically swimming out of their lane? Like they're giving advice or giving guidance where they really aren't qualified to do so.
Yeah. Well, I think the biggest red flag is saying, oh, you don't need to speak to them. I can do this for you. I think, and that's not even if they don't go outside of their scope of practice, even illegally, just the reality is, no one can be an expert in all things. And that's one of the things that we really focus here on USCA is when we create our certifications, it's not one person creating it. We try to find the top contributor for each specific area, whether it's altitude acclimation or nutrition or sports psychology. You just can't be an expert in all things. So that's a flag right there. Someone says they can do it all. There are some things that I don't care how much this person knows. They could know more than a registered dietitian. They could know more than a physical therapist, but the law states what you can and cannot do. You cannot prescribe nutrition plans, supplements, all that kind of stuff. You cannot treat injuries. You cannot diagnose injuries. So and that does happen a lot, you'll hear a coach say, oh, this is a, I don't know, ITB band issue, or, and then you'll hear, oh, hey, I usually go out and take, get these vitamin D supplements. Like it's very innocent sounding because it sounds more of just advice, but essentially you're prescribing these things, or you're diagnosing these things, and you simply cannot do that legally. And then, like I said, the other side of the coin is uh, scope of knowledge, right? Like if I just try to make something up, and you see this a lot with coaches too, they don't want to come off sounding stupid. So they'll just make something up, or they'll just kind of grab at straws because they feel that whatever they say is probably more than their athlete knows. So they'll just kind of make stuff up and try to wing it. And it's never the right approach. The right approach is always, I'm not sure. Either let me do some research, let me get back to you on that, or you know what, I know someone who's better suited to answer this question. Let me refer you to them. Or if it's outside their scope of practice, I actually can't discuss this or talk about this because I'm not a registered dietitian or whatever. I would suggest you go seek someone out, and hopefully that coach would have someone that they could refer them to.
Rick, you touched on your approach to preparing the certification process and finding the best there is to talk about these subjects. Can you elaborate on that a little bit more? Because I think it's a very important point when considering your certification program, of the due diligence that you're doing before those certification programs are created.
Yeah, it's a lot. Now it's a little bit easier because it's a fairly small, like I think a lot of industries, it's fairly small once you get into this sort of inner circle and you know certain people, they all know other people. And you kind of work with these high level people. But initially it was hard. It was doing a lot of research online to find, who we felt were the best people. The challenge, of course, right, is if you do say, okay, I'm going to go after the best person for XYZ, other people are going after that person as well, whether it be for content, to get on a podcast, to write an article for. So they're very in demand. So I realized earlier on that my role really, once I stopped producing content and started taking this role, it was really more of a salesman, to be honest with you. I had to sell myself. I had to sell the business, why it would be worth their time to create content for us. But yeah, it was a lot of work to find, who we felt would be the right ones. And then there's the other side to the equation. Can they communicate this information well to the layperson, right? Like, because that's the other problem. A lot of people are super, super smart, but when they write it down on paper or they talk, can't understand a word they're saying because it's such a high level. So that's the other challenge. So I feel very fortunate that we have sort of, for the most part, the right team of all these different disciplines. Super smart people, top in their industry, who can also present in a way that people like myself can understand.
You mentioned sales and your sales strategy. What was the trick to convincing these people, especially early on when you were coming out of the gate? What was the special sauce there?
Yeah, I don't know if there was a special sauce. I think being genuine. I think what I was trying to do was different. I think our competitors at the time didn't offer a lot of value, and I think that was well understood in the industry. So the fact that I was trying to raise the bar as far as the education, and most of these people, whether they're researchers, academics, whatever they are, understood, they got into it for that reason as well, to kind of help educate people. So I think there was sort of that synonymous, goal between the two of us, and they liked the approach. It wasn't about just creating some, one and done, super fast kind of thing. Like, for example, our certifications, if you were to print them out, they're over 600 pages. It's a lot of stuff. It goes deep into anatomy and physiology and mechanics. And I think most of these contributors really appreciated that approach, kind of like a mini 4-year degree, if you will, as far as the way how it's structured. And then, yeah, it was just getting on the phone with them and having that conversation. But so I think it was just kind of just being genuine about what we were trying to do and how it was different from what was currently out there in the direction of some of those organizations. Again, not that they're bad, we just took a different direction.
Just came into my head. I'm thinking about these thousands of coaches that visit your site, take these courses, become certified. Do you put an effort into building a community of the coaches that are certified within your programs?
We do, yeah. And it's something that we're looking to do even more. We're looking to eventually have some like coach camps and all these kind of things. Probably the biggest resource right now, and when we get feedback from people that have taken our course and passed it, they said one of the biggest values isn't even really the content. They said, I mean, look, it's great. I learned a lot and all that kind of stuff, but it's really the value to know that there's this pool of coaches now I know is certified through USCA as well, that I can reach out to. So we have a Facebook coaches group. And we probably get anywhere from 3 to 4 to 5 questions a day. There's, I think about 1,000, I think there's a little over 1,500 people in this coaches group right now. Um, and yeah, these questions come up all the time, and it's so awesome because so many of these coaches, they'll come right on and provide their answer, so it's become a tremendous resource, I think, for these coaches to ask other coaches, other like-minded coaches, questions, and I would say 9 times out of 10, or maybe almost 10 out of 10, the whoever asked the question, they get their question answered at least to the level that they wanted it.
And that's being answered by the community.
That's being answered by the community. Yeah. I pretty much, unless there's something that's directly in my wheelhouse, I typically, I see most of the stuff, but I typically don't answer. Again, as I know to my partner, Cindy, she'll chime in if something's in her wheelhouse. But yeah, it's kind of like, look, let the experts out there, we have physicians, athletic trainers, physical therapists, psychologists, you name it, are in this group, specialists in pelvic floor exercises and Pilates instructors. So they sort of, people chime in as they see fit based off the type of question that comes in. So yeah, it's been a huge resource. I certainly personally learned a lot as well, just reading the questions and the answers posed in that group.
I bet. Switching gears slightly, Rick, going back to your entrepreneurial journey, what unexpected pleasure, challenge, you name it, has popped up while you've been building your business?
Yeah. I don't know what I expected getting into this. It's funny, this career path and even as a personal trainer is very different from what I grew up with. My parents were both college professors, both, PhD, tenured professors, very secure jobs. Then I go off and do something like this. So I didn't really have an understanding of what being a small business owner was. I've worked for small business owners. I was a mechanic in a bike shop. And so I sort of saw what it was like, but I didn't really have a good understanding. I made a conscious effort from the beginning to not seek out investors. I just didn't want that added stress waking up knowing, that, hey, someone's going to be looking for a 5-10x return and all that kind of stuff. And it's compared to some other businesses, it's something that I don't think really required a ton of capital to get started. So I was very fortunate in that regard. And I sort of stayed true to that. I kind of want to keep it private, just by, self-funded, but that's also become the challenge is I think every business owner, as they progress, hits these sticking points where to get to the next level, it takes more capital, either to hire another headcount or to buy this new software or to whatever. So I don't know if it was unexpected, but I would say at certain points in this business journey, cash flow has been, for lack of a better, a challenge, and it's figuring out how to get over that challenge. Do you just wear 5 more hats at that time? And then once, hopefully you make enough money, then you can hire another headcount, or how does that work? So that's probably been the biggest challenge, I think, of growing it. And then knowing who to hire. I think, it's a challenge hiring great people. And that's always the case, I think. That's certainly not isolated to me, obviously. So, but yeah, that's probably been the biggest challenge for me, I would say, is a cash flow issue, just knowing how to deal with that.
When I've advised companies that are in similar situations, I always tell them that you're going to make a better business decision when cash is tight. Like when you really have to make a choice, you're going to analyze that choice. You're going to really lean into it. And instead of having a little bit of everything, you're going to have a lot of one thing. And so it's actually a disciplinary benefit to having to bootstrap into cash flow. I know it's painful because I've been there too.
Yeah.
You also mentioned hiring. Any tricks of the trade that you've figured out over the years that, points into one good hire versus a bad hire?
Yeah, I don't know. I think someone who's just professional, who really, it's funny. When I was in New York working as a trainer, I started off as a trainer and then I moved into the management side. So I was a general manager of some like corporate fitness centers like Goldman Sachs and all that kind of stuff. So hiring was certainly a big part of it. And I always thought when I got into hiring, because I'd never done it before, or managing, that the stuff that someone would get written up for or fired would be something just crazy, like you punched someone in the face or you stole $1 million, but it was always the basics. It was showing up on time, returning emails, returning phone calls, just stuff that would be asked at any job. And I found that I always thought prior to that, that's just stuff just always happens. That's common sense. People just do that. And I found that it's not common sense and people don't always just do these things. Um, so I think having, being able to read people, being able to understand that, this is the nuts and the bolts is so important. Stuff that I took for granted that everyone did. Like I said, not everyone does. So that's the first step, is making sure that they have that. I think hiring for personality, hiring for those basics, being a hard worker, being persistent, all those things we spoke of at the initial part of this call, about, the synonymous with being an endurance athlete. That's really the stuff I hire for. That's what I look for. The job description, not so much. I mean, if they've done stuff, great, but I feel like a lot of that stuff can be taught if they're smart and they're hardworking. But you can't teach someone if they just don't have that core elements of what it should be like to be a responsible person, a responsible employee.
You're spot on there. Rick, tell us a little bit more about you. Like you mentioned your professional life. Go back to your childhood. Like, where did you grow up? Give us a little bit more information on you.
Yeah, I grew up in Stroudsburg, Pennsylvania. It's in the Pocono Mountains. If any of your listeners are familiar with that, kind of on the border with Jersey. I grew up, it's a pretty rural, small town, I would say. It's grown since then. But I grew up racing bikes. I started about 14 years old, and raced pretty seriously, till probably my little bit when I first got into college. I had a chance to race over in Europe and Belgium and Holland. And I thought I wanted to be a pro bike racer until I did that. And then I realized that I'm not very good, but at least not compared to the international, the top racers in the world. So that kind of stopped. I figured I should maybe go to school. So I went to school in Springfield, Massachusetts, to Springfield College for kinesiology. After I got done there, I moved back home for, I don't know, 6 months or so, worked in a small gym, and then moved to New York City after that. It's about an hour and a half away from where I grew up, and more or less worked there until 2018. Like I said, I was very fortunate to work at some of the sort of top health clubs there, whether it be commercial or corporate. Met a lot of amazing people as clients, met a lot of friends as trainers. I had a great time in the city. It was kind of the right place at the right time. And then by the end, I kind of started to hate the city, and I'm glad I moved out here to Colorado. But that's sort of a snapshot of it, growing up sort of in a rural area. And when I moved to New York, I thought I'd move there for a couple years. I worked at this really kind of fancy health club, get that on my resume, and then whatever, go somewhere else. And it's just a blink of an eye happened. It's been 20 years, and I don't know quite how that happened, but here we are.
So I'm curious, what did your parents say when you told them that you're breaking off and starting your business and it's going to be your sole gig?
Yeah, my parents have always been supportive of me with all my crazy ideas, for better or worse. I'm not sure if that was a good thing or not. Like I said, my lifestyle has been very different from theirs. Like I said, they were very academic, got their doctorates and then taught in the state system, university system. Whereas I went off to New York, became a personal trainer, commission only, tried to pay, crazy rent and live this lifestyle, and then come out here. It was, there wasn't really anything, good. I think it was probably more positive, like, oh, great, go for it. But I don't think my mom really, unfortunately, my father passed away, but my mom was, I don't think she was really for or against it. She was like, okay, if you want to do that, do that, kind of like, good luck. And, but yeah, fortunately it worked out, but I don't think she doesn't have a lot of, benchmark, I guess, for kind of this sort of thing I'm doing. Cause it's nothing that she did, nothing that my father really did. So yeah, it's just sort of like, okay, let's go for it, see what happens. So, sort of just, yeah, it's just interesting that it is very different, but my mom and my dad were always very supportive, whether it's like, hey, I want to try to be a bike racer for a living, or I'm going to move to New York to do personal training. They're like, okay, go for it.
It's funny. I was with my parents yesterday, and I still think they don't know what I do for.
Yeah, it's funny.
Okay.
That's funny.
How could an audience member get in touch with you?
Probably through our website's the best way. uesca.com. My personal email is rick, RICK, @uesca.com. And then the website's uesca.com. But yeah, they can email me directly if they have any questions about business or coaching or whatever it may or may not be. Certainly happy to answer any questions that your listeners might have.
Awesome. And we'll leave those in the show notes. My final question for you, what words of advice would you give a budding entrepreneur who's listening to the show right now?
Yeah, I would say, you know, there's so much noise out there right now, right? Whether it be like, I feel like every time I log on to Facebook or something, there's some new mastermind out there or some new, ninja hack to do this and that and this. I think the advice I would give is that, you know, do things right from the get-go. Don't try to take shortcuts. It takes work. There's all these things like, oh, make $1 million over the night. It kind of goes back to that old adage, right? If it sounds too good to be true, it probably is. Try to do things the right way, do things with integrity, plan your business out, but know that you got to play the long game. It's not an overnight thing. You have to have patience. It's going to suck a lot sometimes. There's going to be extreme highs and extreme lows, and you just have to ride it. You have to ride the waves and just stay committed to it, and just know that it's a journey, and you have to always stay in it for the right reasons. Yeah, like I said, and that's one thing I would say we've tried to do from the integrity standpoint is, if you do things the right way and you try to, really be customer centric and customer focused, things will probably go your way. I think if you're trying to make the quick buck, if you're trying to just, make as much money as possible overnight, you probably can, but there's no sustainability in that. So I would say focus on long-term growth versus, short-term gains.
It's very well said, and complements our endurance mindset and how we kicked off the show.
Yeah.
Rick, thank you for your time and energy today. I love the work that you and your team are doing, especially around certifications and purifying as best we can the coaching process, because it is such a critical role in what we do in both business and in our personal lives and in our endurance. That if you get it wrong and you get the wrong resource, it could have a negative impact on what you're trying to accomplish. So
Sure.
To my audience members, please like this show. Please spread it with your friends and your community. Let's spread Rick's message and the learnings that we've had in today's episode. Again, Rick, thank you so much for your time. It's been great having you on our show.
Yeah, thanks a lot, Greg. I appreciate you having me on. Thank you so much.
Thank you for tuning in to the Chief Endurance Officer Podcast. To hear more inspiring stories and strategies around the endurance mindset, be sure to subscribe below or visit us at chiefenduranceofficer.com. Until next time, keep pushing those limits.